Welcome to Meet the Leader, the podcast where top leaders share how they're tackling the world's toughest challenges. In today's episode, we talk about designing for equity, why it's important, and what leaders need to know about what's holding it back. Subscribe to Meet the Leader on Apple, Spotify, and wherever you get your favorite podcasts. I'm Linda Lucina from the World Economic Forum, and this is Meet the Leader.
We're missing half of the population, women and girls, in the design of the solutions.
Did you know that women are more likely to be killed in a car crash because that car's safety features were probably tested on a male crash test dummy? Or that women receive just 12% of all artificial heart implants because they're not designed to fit in female chests? The world, in many cases, is just not designed for half the population. Regina Montin knows this well. She is the Chief of Innovation at the United Nations Population Fund. And she's looking to help make research and design more inclusive for women and for everyone. Her agency launched the Equity 2030 Alliance last year, and that brings together leaders in tech and pharma and other sectors, all to share best practices. There's experts in academia and government and business, and they all come together to advocate for new standards, all in equitable investment, and to champion new gender-inclusive approaches to tech and design. Gina is also a former physician and a public health expert, and she understands how investments in research and design impact the lives of everyday people, especially those who have the least resources. She shared with me what she's seen on the ground and what's needed to tackle bias in design and what every leader needs to keep in mind. We'll get into all of that, but first, we'll talk more about equity in design.
The problem, we're missing half of the population, women and girls, in the design of the solutions. And it goes across the sector. And it goes across technology, science, investment, decision-making for financing, car industry, sport, wherever you take, whatever you touch, women are missing out. And we're not talking about some niche market. We're talking really about half of the population. And unless we address their needs and include their needs and concern and voices, not only as part of developers or researchers, but also as part of the design set, data set, then it will be just an assumption, basically. And whatever we call human-centric is basically male-centric and not gender-neutral. It's gender-blind because assumption doesn't work. You have to prove it with metrics, with measurements, with the data that actually you are equitable in your data set and include those who should be included.
And by not factoring in half the population, what is the potential risk that we have either for healthcare outcomes, for investments in developments and research? What is the worst case scenario that could come if we're not factoring in that half of the population?
It goes from being uncomfortable, and we talk about, size of the phone, which doesn't fit my pocket, but it actually can go to really dangerous, because when we talk that only 22% of clinical trials include women in their design, that means that the rest 4 out of 5 trials do not really work and is not designed on women. And that's why women have 4 times more adverse reaction to medicines which comes to the market. They have to wait 4 more years to be diagnosed because the test and diagnostics is not really working on them and not prioritized. We're talking about, let's say, car industry where the car safety is still being built on a male crash dummy, still until now. And women are 3 times more likely to be severely injured during the car collision. And we're talking about less lack of access to financing and funding because the decision algorithms do not include actual needs of women and actual metrics around their investability index. If we talk about sport, the shoes for the female athletes are not designed on the female anatomy, which results in up to 6 times more injuries of their ligaments in the knee, ACL injuries. We're missing out those stars in the tournaments because they're being injured. So really, it can be fatal, it can be lethal, or it can be just uncomfortable on your day-to-day basis as well, which is also not okay. And there is a solution to that. This is not unsolvable. We're not talking about something where we really need to engage the greatest mind of the world to resolve it. No, solution is so simple. Just include the women when you create something. Make sure it works for them as much as it works for men. And of course, we're talking about women and girls and all their diversity, and there are further layers of disaggregation. But let's even start with that simple one, and I'm sure we can move further and advance it.
Can you tell me a little bit about the UN Digital Compact? There's a special self-assessment tool that's really revealing about how inclusive companies even think that they are when they're being asked the question and deciding to tell the truth. Can you tell us a little bit about this? What is that inclusivity self-assessment tool telling us?
So there are thousands, I think it's more than 16,000 companies registered as a part of UN Global Compact. And we're talking about really private sector for profit. There is a self-assessment tool which asks them, do you consider different impact of women and men? Do you consider different metrics around your product design for women and men? And less than 20% of them report that they do. And over 40% report they don't even plan to do it. So they don't consider different impact, they don't consider equitable design, and they don't even plan to do it at the moment. And the rest in between, yes, they understand there is a need, but they have maybe some plans to do it in the future, but they're not there yet. Which for me is a striking number, because if only 1/5 of the companies are actually making real-time efforts to address this issue, and we're definitely not where we want to be.
What are some of the blind spots that some of these organizations have when it comes for designing for equity?
The blind spot is assumption. I speak with many leading top tech industries, for example, or even pharmaceutical companies, and they say, no, but of course we do. It's logical. It makes sense. Of course we do include women. And when I ask, okay, do you have proof? Do you have numbers? Can you tell me really how does it work? And they don't. And from my perspective, if you don't have the data, if you don't have argument to prove it, then assumption doesn't work. It is unfortunately cheaper to have men as reference men. It is cheaper to go to the group of people, even including developed countries. They always go to the cheaper and easier accessible group of people. Like we know vaccines, a lot of them developed on military groups, and AI was initially developed largely on a male database. And that's why it's so historically biased. It is really hard to unbias now. And unless we make conscious efforts, and as we say, measure what you treasure and treasure what you measure. So working on assumptions will be always making those solutions blind and not correct.
The companies that are succeeding, the ones that are designing for equity, they've got successful and effective practices. What are those practices? What would that look like?
So the companies who are making conscious efforts to do it, they're also making an investment case, an economic case for that. So I will give an example of those companies who have publicly available real use cases on those efforts to invest in women-centric solutions, but also to make their product really inclusive. And let's say Adobe, and Adobe is like a really top tier of the tech companies. They have a huge team working specifically on inclusivity in design. They have data showing how their market share grows, how their products are more accessible and relevant to all of the population, not only to the part of the population. So we also work with companies like Salesforce, for example, who are doing really conscious efforts to making sure that their training is inclusive of needs of both men and women. Their pronouns are inclusive of different aspects of the identity of people across the world. Their investments are going specifically towards women-centric solutions. And those are really successful companies. And those are the companies who can demonstrate you can do well by doing good. Yes, it takes investments, but it pays off as well. And we also know one of the maybe most known across the markets case when the wearables were just on the market. And at first, women consumers were not really buying it. And the companies who were producing wearables started to do the research, what's happening. And women were aware about the product, but they were not buying it because it didn't fit their purpose. It wasn't designed for them, not by style, by size, but also it didn't measure those health attributes of your well-being and health which you as a woman would like to measure and track. So when the wearables companies started to design it with the women in mind as part of the design, already in the first year, the market sale and share grew twice. So we have examples when it works, and it's not only ethical or human rights argument here, it's also an investment case. You invest in it, but your return of investment also is really promising.
And what are these features that maybe are more woman-centric?
Well, women, every cell in our body is gendered. So everything in our body is working differently. And if it's not accounted for, you can't assume that the product will work for you. And we are talking about voice recognition, facial recognition, even let's say hair differences. Let's say the hair of the certain ethnicities are more curly and thick. And when you design like a headset, you think it's comfortable, but if you don't really test it on women with different hairstyle, it will not. If you think about the AI recognizing some skin features or even like diseases like lesions, if you test it only on a white skin, it will not work as well on a black skin for sure, because then it's not inclusive. And if we talk about tracking metrics of health, women are going through so many very different transitions in their life. And we're talking about menstruation, we're talking about menopause, we're talking about different body temperature, different sweating, different calories lost, depends on even your age or what hormonal cycle you're going through or pregnancy-related changes. If all of that is only designed based on a male body, 100% it will not work accurately on female body. And then I buy the product and use it, and it actually doesn't reflect what I need to be there.
You mentioned the Equity 2030 Alliance. Can you tell us a little bit more about it?
So the Alliance is really using a convening power of UN, United Nations, to bring together the actors. We are not producers of solutions, be it technology, be it science or investments, but we can bring together those who are. And through their actions, through what they do, we can really amplify the reach and reach millions, if not billions of people through their products. We can also make sure that those investments are going towards the solution and addressing the needs of those billions of people. And we use them as champions to show others that it's possible. Many are in agreement with us. Yes, it should be done. But then they ask, where do we start? If others are doing it, our peer companies, our main competitors, let us see what they do. And that's why we really are trying to bring both leaders in the industry, but also a medium-sized and a small companies too, to really be all together in that space and future what they do to lead others in the same direction.
So they see other people in their cohort. They want to be there as well.
It's a positive peer pressure.
Exactly. And the folks in the Alliance are helping to develop, but also share best practices. What are some best practices that have been sort of developed by some of the partner companies?
So as I mentioned, for example, some companies are really putting in place specific expert teams to ensure their products are inclusive. Some companies, like pharmaceutical companies, really making commitment and action on those commitments to invest through research and development to women-centric solutions. And this is very important because if you talk global research and development volume, which is about $2.4 trillion US dollars, only 1% globally goes to women-centric solutions out of a whole volume of 2.4 trillion. And this is not including cancers and oncological diseases, but still it's just 1%, which is so low. There is a term, life years lost to disability. And in a simple way, I can say it's how many years you spend in poor health. And women spending life years in poor health due to the female-related conditions, if you put those years all together, it will be much more in developing countries than malaria, tuberculosis, and HIV combined. However, those three infectious diseases are getting more than 50% of global research and development, and women's health still getting just 1%. So we can be very ambitious here and say we double or triple it, and we still will not be where we should be. But we're happy to have companies who are putting their money into that and saying we're committing majority of our investments in R&D, specifically addressing women's health. Or specifically addressing women's health solution, be it in education, training, or healthcare services. And we are trying to demonstrate it and saying this is what they do. That includes also academia, because academia is a big part of this conversation. We need to produce data and arguments, and academia is investing in that. But we also need to address education of those future researchers, coders, developers, engineers. Because if we train them to be socially agnostic and gender unequitable, it's unfair to expect from them when they graduate that they will suddenly think about it when they develop their products. If we train them to think about gender equity from the very beginning and inclusivity and build that inclusivity muscle in them, then we can expect that they will start from the right point of view when they start developing their products.
I think it's interesting you say that it starts even with the training, even at the education level. What are other places, little milestone moments in the design of a product that inclusivity might not be part of the conversation?
I think all stages. And that's the important thing, that sometimes and oftentimes what we see is a damage control. After the product is already either near ready or already on the market, and then we suddenly realize, oops, it doesn't work. The voice recognition doesn't recognize as well female voice as male voice, or facial recognition doesn't work, or the healthcare product doesn't really work, or actually creating more harm than good for women. So really, we need to start from the very beginning, and we want to normalize this conversation. And when I say normalize, I will bring you an example about the gender equality at the workplace. When, 50 years ago, if you see a company only full of men or leadership only men, we wouldn't question even it. Maybe some will think it's not okay, but many will say, okay, yeah, that's how they operate. Maybe they couldn't find a great expert woman in that particular team. Nowadays, if you see that, you question it and you voice this question and concern. So we normalize this conversation. Yes, maybe we're not there yet in terms of real gender parity at all levels, but we know it's not normal if it's not even being thinking about from the beginning. But design is not yet there. So developers are creating products without necessarily thinking about it. And the question should be asked. And that's why those not only self-assessment tools, but also we're working with governments, including this question when they give grants or in the policy regulations, or even intellectual property registration. We should be asking them, do you think about it? Do you include women as part of your solution design or not? And if not, please explain. And there are some good examples like the NIH already not giving grants if the clinical trial doesn't include women, or there is no explanation for that. But it's not yet across all the levels, across all the governments. And it shouldn't be only addressed at the regulatory framework level, but really at investment level at all levels, and should become a part of the corporate frameworks across industries.
Do you think that we will reach a point where design equity and inclusivity is there? We've got that piece in place. Or do you think that it'll always be maybe a moving target?
I think we can. It's a journey, obviously. And it's a journey in a way because there is always something new. And now we're in the place of the fourth industrial revolution office, but we know we're already at the dawn of the fifth industrial revolution, where we're bringing robots, machines, and humans working together and finding the way of the best collaboration. So there will be every day something new. But if we normalize that conversation, that inclusivity muscle should be there at all stages of the design, I think we will be there, because then it will not be something we ask or have to check. It will be part of everybody's thinking. And with that, I am quite optimistic and hopeful that we will reach that point, because we started this conversation. Some years ago, we didn't even talk about it. So we recognize the problem, and that's already a big and a huge starting point. Once you recognize the problem, you start to find the ways how to address it. And as I mentioned at the beginning, it's not something unsolvable. It is actually quite easy, and we know how.
The Forum has an annual piece of research it puts out, the Global Gender Gap, and regularly it's more than 100 years in order to reach that gender gap. It changes slightly from year to year, but it's always a 3-digit number. In your mind, what is the number one thing that has to change to bridge that gap? And that's a gap both in pay and leadership and participation in all kinds of industries, including science and technology. In your mind, what is the number one thing that needs to change globally to bridge that gap?
Diversity. The diversity should be at all levels. That's just one word, diversity, but of course it covers so much. Diversity in the decision makers teams, diversity in the teams themselves, those who are researchers, engineers, coders, life science experts, diversity in the design and data set, diversity across. And we actually have some data from the World Intellectual Property Organization, who are also part of our alliance, that when you have intellectual property requests from the all-female teams, they are 34% more likely to address specific needs of women. So bringing women around the table across all the levels and across all the sectors, but also part of the design, that's, I would say, the number one answer to many, many problems.
Is there a piece of tech right now for women's health that you think is really, really exciting and, just something to watch?
I would talk about AI here everywhere, right? So I think it's like across many sessions, and like you drive through San Francisco and every billboard is about AI in one or another sector. And I'm actually very excited. I know it should be ethical, rights-based and inclusive, and it's not there yet. But it can actually bring so much potential even to the low resource settings. There is an assumption that AI is like really high tech and not really working for the low resources, which is actually not true. We have great examples when we use AI-powered ultrasound for pregnancy or AI-powered chatbots for education, and we bring it to the really low resource communities, and we see how it can change lives and save lives of so many people. So we see when we bring those solutions, which are not low tech by itself, but they can be used even in the no connectivity settings and can save lives of women in millions, basically. So I'm really excited about those developments. But at the same time, I'm also conscious that we should make sure that it is done in the right way, and do not harm principle should be always there in everything we do.
We talked a little bit about innovations that you're saying are giving us promise. What is maybe something that kind of keeps you up at night when it comes to, design or even with health technology for inclusivity?
Tough question. I think what keeps me up at night is leaving no one behind. It's easy to assume that, we have so much technology, so many different projects, and we're resolving and addressing needs of so many people. But there are always those marginalized communities, fathers left behind communities, refugees, people on the move, women and girls who nobody even talk about oftentimes. And those progress and development, which we are all excited about, it doesn't reach them, or doesn't reach them in an equitable manner. And again, it takes the conscious efforts to make sure it does reach them, and the progress should be equitable in its benefits. And I'm a big believer that innovation and technology can equalize opportunities for women and girls. And that's why I called my fund Equalizer. At the same time, it doesn't come automatically. It needs to be consciously addressed with specific efforts. And I think that leaving no one behind is the number one priority in everything which we are trying to do.
What gives you hope?
The number of people I see who are passionate about it, who are in the same space when we have this conversation, the number of people who are committed to drive this forward, that's what gives me hope, because there are many. And sometimes we come to the companies which, I don't know, in number 3 of the top tech, let's say, or top pharmaceutical industries. And you think, it's such a giant industry. You probably will not be able to move anything there. But then you find that one champion who is committed, and it can be man and it can be woman, their diversity. Sometimes it doesn't have to be only female champion. And they really drive that conversation, and they make sure that they bring the industry with them. So those people, those advocates are our arms of change and agents of change. And I really believe that with that many people who I see already in the space, the change is possible.
You have a background in medicine. Can you tell me a little bit about that and what made you make the change to your current role where you're sort of driving innovations and help in a different way?
Yes, true. I am obstetrician gynecologist, and I worked in countries like Papua New Guinea, Gambia, Ethiopia as a doctor. So I saw firsthand how a simple solution can change thousands of lives. And it's not there. That's not being introduced to those communities. But I think what was the biggest turning point is the COVID-19 pandemic, which forced us to innovate. So the telemedicine, the remote learning, when everybody got locked down in their rooms and the homes and whatever communities they were, but women didn't get stopped pregnant. Women didn't get from being abused. They still needed services, clinical services, health services. And we were forced to innovate around that and make sure that they're still receiving those services, commodities, medicines, consultations. And I think that showed me that it's also not only needed, but possible. And it showed me a lot of ways how to do it, even when we're talking about very low resource communities. The communities may be low resource, but people are resourceful. Women are resourceful. We often underestimate the ability of women to act, to make sure that they are doing well and their families are doing well, including in terms of health. And that what actually gave me a lot of motivation and inspiration to systematize it and start within our organization, the fund, which are now specifically addressing those needs.
What from your background as a physician sort of helps you? Is there maybe a protocol or a way that you would make decisions or choices that has helped you drive conversations for innovation?
Understanding of those layers of the needs and also from the very different settings. As I said, I worked in low income countries and lowest least developed countries, but also in the middle income countries. And I saw those communities. I was there holding hands of those women, sometimes those women who lost their lives because of lack of services and lack of advanced solutions which could be available for them and save them. So when I speak about it, when I speak about this inclusivity muscle, I know it not from books or movies or documentaries. I know it because I lived through that. And I can always see that face in front of me when I talk about that woman who is in need. And I think that makes me easier to make people to believe that I am not only preaching or advocating for something which is the bureaucratic tagline somewhere. It is actually about lives of people, which I witnessed myself. And being part of that, being part of the journey, hands-on, like really being there, I think that makes it relevant to different communities. And that makes my conversation, putting it really on that level of trust, which always helps.
Is there a habit, something that you depend on as a leader now that just would not have occurred to you at the beginning of your career, but something that you really, really employ all the time?
Listening to others. Doesn't matter what level, doesn't matter what level of expertise also, seniority. There's always something to learn. And the new perspective of other people is always so helpful and beneficial. And I think that listening skills can be lost easily when you think you know it all and you're expert and you like have your, PhD degrees, masters and everything. But the world is evolving and everybody has something to add to the table and added value. And I think this is really, really important and becoming even more and more important as I grow in my career, that listening to others will always make you as a person, as an expert, more rich in the wealth of knowledge you have and the wealth of solutions you can future.
UNFPA runs a number of innovation challenges. And is there something in your mind that all sort of startups or entrepreneurs need to make sure that they can truly tackle big global challenges? How can we help entrepreneurs and the next generation of problem solvers? What do they need most from us?
Depends, right? But I will talk about those entrepreneurs we work with. And we work with the social entrepreneurs in the developing countries. First of all, they lack access to funding. And especially we talk about female-led enterprises and female entrepreneurs. The percentage, I think it's less than 7% of those applicants who get actually access to funding and financing. So that's number one. And that's what we're giving through the innovation challenges. We give them the seed grants to help them to mature the innovations, to advance it. Then we want them to become investable. Because a lot of the VCs operating, especially in the Western world, they look at the entrepreneurs as they should make, $1 million a year or whatever, and then we give them loans or equity. And it doesn't work in many of those entrepreneurs we work with. They have great solutions and we are vetting those solutions. Are they actually addressing the problems which are there in those communities? But we're also helping them to become investable. So for scale, then they can be introduced to the investors to actually take those solutions to the bigger market and bigger scale. But that takes time and mentorship and coaching. And that's why we're always also accompanying our seed grants with the mentorship and coaching and capacity building, because we can bring those experts from those who knows already that journey and what should be done there to help them and connect them with those teams to really help those solutions to reach more people.
Is there a piece of advice that you've always been grateful for?
Be authentic yourself. Coming from the developing country myself originally, I did have that kind of perception, oh, do I fit? Or now when I'm a medical doctor and often talk to technology companies, do I fit the conversation? I think staying true to yourself. If I don't know, I ask. And I admit I don't know. But if I know, I speak about it, and with passion and authority. So recognizing this is helping in my confidence, helping in my development, but also helping me to stay in that path of growth, which I am committed to. And in my career, I never saw my growth as like a vertical ladder. It's kind of almost a jungle gym movement. Sometimes it's lateral, sometimes it's going down and volunteering somewhere. Sometimes it's jumping up and accepting new challenges and new opportunities. But I always did what I love. And throughout my professional career, I never did something I just do for, pay the bills and get salary or just work somewhere. No, I always did what I really love and passionate about. And I think that's part of also staying true to myself and to my interests and to my beliefs.
That was Nikina Montine. Thanks so much to her, and thanks so much to you for listening. To check out more ways leaders are bridging big equity gaps, check out our coverage of this September's Sustainability Development Impact Meeting. It's an event the Forum puts on each year during the United Nations General Assembly, and we will share how people are making change happen on the way to tackling the UN Sustainability Goals. Follow hashtag SDIM24 online, and don't miss a step. To read our recent Global Gender Report, go to the show notes of this episode. We'll make sure to have a link. And to listen to more podcasts, including my colleagues' podcast, Radio Davos, go to wef.ch/podcasts. This episode of Meet the Leader was produced and presented by me, with Jarrett Johansson and Taz Kelleher as editor and Gareth Nolan driving studio production. That's it for now. I'm Linda Lacina from the World Economic Forum. Have a great day.